genuinely believed I had a solid marriage. My wife, Emma, and I had been together for almost 9 years, married for 6. We didn't have kids yet, mostly because we wanted to get our finances in order first, and honestly, I thought we were working toward the same future. Looking back now, there were warning signs everywhere. The problem is that when you love someone, you become really good at explaining away things that should probably concern you. About 8 months ago, Emma started acting different. At first it was subtle. She became protective of her phone. If a text came in, she'd turn the screen away from me. If I walked into the room while she was texting, she'd suddenly lock her phone and ask me some random question to change the subject. I noticed it, but I didn't immediately jump to cheating. I told myself she was stressed. Then came the late nights. Emma worked in marketing, and suddenly there were emergency projects every week. Team dinners, client meetings, networking events. At first I believed every word. Then the stories started changing. One night she'd tell me she was having dinner with coworkers. A few days later she'd casually mention that it was actually drinks at a hotel bar. Then later she'd say it wasn't coworkers at all, it was a client meeting. Every version contradicted the last. Whenever I pointed that out, she'd get annoyed, not defensive. And thought, like I was inconveniencing her by remembering things she already said. Why are you interrogating me? Do you seriously keep track of every little thing I say? You've become so insecure lately. That last one hit hard because I started wondering if she was right. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe work really was stressful. Maybe I was overthinking everything. But there was one moment I couldn't shake. About 6 months ago, we were at her parents' house for her dad's birthday. Everyone was in the backyard except Emma, who was inside talking on the phone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just looking for the bathroom. As I walked past the kitchen, I heard her laughing. Not the laugh she used with friends. Not the laugh she used with family. It was the flirtatious laugh I remembered from when we were dating. Then I heard her say, "No, stop. You're terrible." Another laugh. And pause. Then a much softer voice. "I miss you too." I froze. The floor might as well have disappeared beneath me. Before I could hear anything else, she noticed me standing there. The smile vanished from her face instantly. She hung up so fast I barely registered it. "What are you doing?" She snapped. I remember feeling confused more than suspicious. I asked who she was talking to. She didn't even hesitate. "My cousin." A complete lie. I knew every one of her cousins. None of them lived out of state. None of them called her daily. And none of them would make her blush the way she had been blushing seconds earlier. Still, I let it go. I wish I hadn't, because that was the first time I caught her lying directly to my face. It wouldn't be the last. Not even close. And the craziest part? The person who would eventually help me uncover everything wasn't a private investigator, a friend, or even one of my family members. It was Emma's own brother. And at that point, I had absolutely no idea he was already starting to suspect something too. After the phone call incident at her parents' house, I spent weeks trying to convince myself I was imagining things. I wanted a reasonable explanation. I wanted to believe my wife. The problem was that Emma kept giving me reasons not to. Her behavior became stranger almost overnight. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow. Not beside the bed, not on the nightstand, actually under her pillow. One night around 2 a.m. I woke up and saw the glow of her screen illuminating her face in the dark. She was smiling while typing. The second she noticed I was awake, she flipped the phone face down. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. "No one. It's 2 in the morning. I couldn't sleep." "Then why are you texting?" She sighed dramatically. "God, do I need your permission now?" The conversation somehow ended with me apologizing. That became a pattern. Every concern I raised somehow turned into evidence that I was the problem. I was controlling. I was insecure. I was paranoid. I was suffocating her. The strange thing was that I started believing it. When someone repeats something often enough, especially someone you love, you begin to question your own judgment. Then another weird thing happened. Emma suddenly became obsessed with going to the gym. Now, before anyone misunderstands me, there's nothing wrong with getting healthy. The problem wasn't the gym. The problem was the timing. For years she'd hated exercising. Then one day she bought hundreds of dollars worth of workout clothes, expensive perfume, new makeup, and a collection of dresses she'd never worn before. But she wasn't dressing up for date nights. She wasn't dressing up for me. Most of the time she barely acknowledged I existed. Yet somehow every gym session required an outfit that looked ready for a magazine photo shoot. When I mentioned it, she rolled her eyes. "You should be happy. I'm taking care of myself." Again, I apologized. Again, I ignored my instincts. A month later, something happened that should have ended the marriage right there. I just didn't know it yet. I got home early from work. Nothing unusual. A meeting had been canceled. I figured I'd surprise Emma with takeout from her favorite restaurant. I walked into the house carrying food. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. The bedroom was empty. But I could hear the shower running upstairs. I called her name. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. Then the shower suddenly turned off. Not gradually. Instantly. Like someone had panicked. A few seconds later, Emma came downstairs wrapped in a towel. She looked startled. Actually, startled doesn't even begin to describe it. She looked terrified. "What are you doing home?" he asked. Not lie. Not how was your day. Just immediate panic. I remember laughing awkwardly. My meeting got cancelled. Instead of looking happy to see me, she looked angry. Actually angry. For a split second I saw something flash across her face. Ew. Then irritation. Then a fake smile. Oh, that was it. Just oh. The whole interaction felt wrong. Like I'd interrupted something. I checked the house later. Nothing obvious. No extra car. No signs of another person. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone else had been there. That night I barely slept. The next morning I told myself I was being ridiculous. Then, 3 days later, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks. Emma's brother, Jake. It was short. Very short. Just 5 words. We need to talk. At the time I assumed it was about a family issue. Maybe something involving his parents. Maybe money. Maybe health problems. I had absolutely no idea that message was about to blow my entire life apart. And I definitely wasn't prepared for what Jake would tell me when we met. Because according to him, I wasn't the only person noticing Emma's lies anymore. I met Jake 2 days later. The whole thing felt strange from the beginning. Jake and I got along well, but we weren't the kind of guys who met one-on-one very often. Usually we only saw each other during family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, that kind of thing. So when he texted me asking to meet privately, I knew something was up. I just didn't expect how much was up. We met at a small coffee shop across town. When I arrived, Jake was already there. He looked nervous. Really nervous. The kind of nervous where someone keeps checking the door every few seconds. I sat down and tried to joke about it. "You look like you're about to testify against the mob." He didn't laugh. That was the moment my stomach dropped. Jake stared at his coffee for several seconds before speaking. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Before I tell you anything, I need you to know I'm not trying to start problems." My heart immediately started racing. "What happened?" He looked miserable. "I think Emma's lying to you." The room suddenly felt smaller. I remember staring at him, waiting for him to laugh or clarify. He didn't. Instead, he rubbed his face and sighed. I wasn't sure at first. "Sure about what?" He hesitated. Then he finally said it. "I think she's seeing someone." Everything inside me went cold. I wish I could tell you I reacted calmly. I didn't. I immediately defended her. I argued. I made excuses. I practically became Emma's lawyer for 20 straight minutes. Because no matter how suspicious I'd been lately, hearing someone else say it out loud felt different. It made it real. Jake listened to me without interrupting. When I finally stopped talking, he quietly asked, "Then why are you trying so hard to convince yourself?" That question hit harder than anything else. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. He was right. I wasn't trying to convince him. I was trying to convince myself. Jake then explained why he'd contacted me. Apparently, he'd noticed Emma acting weird for months. She'd become secretive around the family. She constantly disappeared during gatherings. She guarded her phone like it contained state secrets. And she kept telling different stories to different people. The final straw happened at their parents' house. A few weeks earlier, Emma had claimed she was spending an entire Saturday at a work conference. The problem? She accidentally told their mother she was spending the day shopping. Then she told Jake she was visiting a friend. 3 completely different stories. Same day, same time. Jake confronted her about it. According to him, she exploded. Not confused, not defensive. Angry, extremely angry. She accused him of spying on her. Then she refused to discuss it further. That was what made him suspicious. But then things got worse. A lot worse. Jake pulled out his phone. "I didn't know whether to show you this." My stomach twisted. "What is it?" He opened a photo. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my brain caught up. It was Emma. There was absolutely no question it was her. She was walking through a downtown shopping district, holding hands with another man. I felt physically sick, not because of the picture itself, because of the date. The photo had been taken on the exact Saturday she'd supposedly been attending that work conference. The same conference she'd talked about for weeks. The same conference she'd used as an excuse to miss our anniversary dinner. I stared at the image for what felt like forever. Part of me kept hoping I'd suddenly realize it wasn't her. Maybe it was someone who looked similar. Maybe there was another explanation. But there wasn't. It was Emma, and she looked happy. Happier than I'd seen her look around me in months. Jake looked devastated. I followed them for a while. What? I know it sounds crazy. I honestly didn't care. I couldn't think straight. Jake swallowed hard. They kissed. Those two words shattered whatever hope I had left. I felt like someone had punched me directly in the chest. Everything suddenly started making sense. The phone, the lies, the late nights, the attitude, the constant blame, all of it. But Jake wasn't finished. Not even close. Because according to him, the photo wasn't the reason he'd asked me to meet. It was something he discovered afterward. Something much worse. Something that suggested this affair wasn't new. And when he told me what he'd found, I realized I might not know my wife at all. I wish I could say the photo was the worst thing Jake showed me that day. It wasn't. Not even remotely. After I'd spent several minutes staring at the picture of my wife holding hands with another man, Jake asked me a question. A simple question. Do you know a guy named Ryan? I immediately shook my head. Oh, Jake nodded slowly. That's what I thought. Then he turned his phone around. There was another picture. This one was clearer. A close-up of the man from the first photo. Mid-30s. Well-dressed. Clean cut. The kind of guy you'd never look twice at if you passed him on the street. Just some random guy. Except apparently he wasn't random at all. That's Ryan. I felt numb. Who is he? Jake hesitated. Then he delivered another punch to the gut. He works with Emma. Of course he did. Suddenly every late meeting, every client dinner, every networking event felt like a joke. A months-long joke I was apparently the only person not in on. I rubbed my face. How long? I don't know. But you think it's serious? Jake looked uncomfortable. Then he gave an answer that terrified me. I think it's been going on longer than she's telling people. Longer. That word echoed in my head. How much longer? 6 months? A year? No. I wasn't sure. I wanted to know. Then Jake showed me why he'd reached that conclusion. Apparently, a friend of his worked in the same office building as Emma. Not the same company, just the same building. A few weeks earlier, that friend had mentioned seeing Emma and Ryan together outside work. Frequently. Too frequently. Lunches, coffee runs, leaving together after hours. The kind of behavior that raises eyebrows. At first, Jake dismissed it. Then he saw the photo. Then things started connecting. One coincidence became 10. 10 became 50. And suddenly the story Emma had been telling everyone stopped making sense. I felt like I was drowning. The woman I trusted for nearly a decade suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. But then something happened that neither Jake nor I expected. My phone rang. Right there in the coffee shop. I looked at the screen. Oh, for a second I considered ignoring it. Then I answered. The moment I picked up, she sounded irritated. Not worried. Not curious. Irritated. Where are you? That was her opening line. Not hello. Not how are you. Just immediate suspicion. I glanced at Jake. Getting coffee? Oh, I froze. Something about the question felt wrong, like she was checking up on me. I answered honestly. Yep. There was a long silence. Then another. Then another. Jake heard it too. The expression on his face changed instantly. Emma finally spoke. Oh, just one word. But her tone had completely shifted. The irritation disappeared. Now she sounded nervous. Very nervous. What are you talking about? I looked directly at Jake. Neither of us said anything. We're just catching up. Another silence. Then she laughed. A fake laugh. The kind people use when they're scrambling. Okay, well, don't be late. We have dinner plans, remember? We didn't. There were no dinner plans. No, Jake heard that too. I watched his eyes widen. The second the call ended, he muttered, why would she lie about that? Exactly. Why would she? A completely pointless lie. A lie that accomplished nothing. Unless she was nervous. Unless she thought Jake had told me something. Unless she was trying to establish a narrative before I got home. That realization hit both of us at the same time. And honestly, it scared me. Because innocent people don't panic when their husband talks to their brother. Jake looked down at the table. Then he said something that changed everything. I think she's hiding more than the affair. I stared at him. What do you mean? He leaned forward, lowered his voice, and told me about a conversation he'd overheard between Emma and their mother a few days earlier. A conversation Emma never realized anyone else had heard. A conversation involving money. A lot of money. And suddenly my failing marriage wasn't the only thing I needed to worry about. At that point, I thought I already knew the worst. I was wrong. When Jake mentioned money, my first thought was that Emma had secretly loaned someone cash or maybe run up some credit card debt. Something irresponsible. Something fixable. I had no idea how serious it actually was. Jake looked genuinely uncomfortable. like he was debating whether he should even continue. Finally, he sighed. I overheard Emma talking to Mom. What about? They were arguing. That got my attention immediately. Emma and her mother almost never argued. If anything, her mom usually defended her no matter what. So hearing it had a fight was surprising on its own. Jake continued. Mom kept asking when she was going to tell you. My stomach tightened. Tell me what? Jake shook his head. That's the problem. I couldn't hear everything. He paused, but I heard enough. I leaned forward. Jake lowered his voice. Emma said she'd handle it before you found out. The word sent a chill down my spine. Handle what? Found out what? I asked him exactly that. He spread his hands. I don't know. Then he pulled out his phone again. At this point, I was starting to hate seeing him reach for it. Every time he did, my life somehow got worse. There's something else. He opened a screenshot. It was from social media. A photo uploaded by someone I didn't recognize. At first glance, it looked harmless. Just a group picture from a rooftop bar downtown. A bunch of people drinking and smiling at the camera. Then Jake zoomed in. My heart stopped. Near the back of the photo were Emma and Ryan, standing extremely close together, his arm around her waist, her hand resting on his chest, neither of them looking remotely concerned about being seen. The timestamp was from nearly 7 months earlier. 7 months earlier. That meant the affair wasn't recent. It wasn't some sudden mistake. It wasn't a drunken lapse in judgment. It had been happening for a very long time, possibly longer than even Jake realized. I felt physically ill. The realization hit me in waves. Every family dinner, every holiday, every anniversary, every vacation, all while she was apparently building a second relationship behind my back. I honestly don't remember much of the next few minutes. Everything felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life collapse. Then Jake said something that snapped me back to reality. You need to check your finances. I blinked. What? Trust me. What? His answer came immediately. Because Emma's lying about too many things. I wish I could tell you I listened right away. I didn't. Part of me still couldn't process everything. The cheating alone felt overwhelming. The idea of financial problems seemed impossible. But later that night, after I got home, I decided to look anyway. And that's when things got even crazier. Because Emma wasn't home. According to her text, she was working late. I sat at my computer, logged into our joint accounts, and started checking. At first, everything looked normal. Then I noticed a transfer, a large transfer, a very large transfer, thousands of dollars, sent from our savings account. My pulse started racing. I checked the date, 3 months earlier. Then another transfer, then another, each one bigger than the last. I stared at the screen in disbelief. By the time I finished adding everything up, my hands were shaking. Nearly $20,000 was gone. $20,000? Money we'd been saving for a house. Money we'd spent years putting aside. Oh, and I had absolutely no idea where it had gone. There were no notes, no explanations, no discussions. Nothing. Just transfer after transfer after transfer. I called Emma immediately. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. 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 Then suddenly I received a text. Not a call. A text. In a meeting. Stop blowing up my phone. I stared at the message. Then I looked at the bank statements. Then back at the message. Something inside me finally snapped. Because for the first time, I wasn't wondering whether Emma was lying. I knew she was. The only question left was how much she was hiding. And before the night was over, I was about to get an answer. A very unexpected answer. From someone neither Jake nor I had even considered talking to. Ryan's wife. I barely slept that night. Between the affair, the missing money, and the growing realization that my wife had been lying to me for months, my brain simply refused to shut off. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that photo. Emma smiling at Ryan, looking happier than she looked around me in a very long time. Around midnight, Jake called. The second I answered, he asked, "Did you check the accounts?" No. His silence told me everything. He'd expected to find something. I told him about the missing money, the transfers, the $20,000, the fact that Emma refused to answer questions. Jake swore under his breath. Then he said something that caught me completely off guard. "I think you should talk to Ryan's wife." I sat upright. What? I found out he's married. For a second, I couldn't even process that. Married. Ryan was married, which meant Emma wasn't just helping destroy one marriage. She was helping destroy two. The realization made me feel sick. Jake explained that he'd done some digging after becoming suspicious. Nothing crazy, just social media, public records, basic searches, enough to confirm Ryan had a wife. Her name was Claire, and according to everything online, she had absolutely no idea what was happening, at least not publicly. I wasn't sure what to do. Part of me wanted to stay out of it. Part of me thought she deserved to know. Before I could decide, Jake dropped another surprise. I already contacted her. I nearly choked. You what? I didn't tell her everything. Jake, I just asked if she'd be willing to talk. I rubbed my temples. The situation somehow managed to become even more complicated. But this morning, I stared at the wall. Did she respond? There was a pause. Then Jake said, yeah. My stomach dropped. She wants to meet. The meeting happened the next evening. Honestly, I almost backed out. The entire situation felt surreal, like something from a movie. Not my life, not my marriage, certainly not something I'd ever imagined myself doing. But I went. Jake came with me, mostly because I was barely holding myself together. Claire arrived a few minutes later. The moment I saw her, I knew something was wrong. She looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that comes from months of stress. Months of unanswered questions. Months of suspicion. The moment we sat down, she asked a question that made my blood run cold. How long have you known? No, not suspected. No. I exchanged a look with Jake. Then I answered honestly. I only found out recently. Claire laughed. Not because anything was funny. The kind of laugh people make when they're emotionally exhausted. Then she opened her purse, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. I stared at it. What is this? Evidence. My heart started pounding. Claire opened the folder. Phone records, photos, screenshots, dates, times, locations, months and months of information. Far more than Jake had managed to collect. Far more than I expected. As it turned out, Claire had been suspicious for nearly a year. Nearly a year. She'd confronted Ryan repeatedly. Every single time he denied everything. Every single time. The similarities were almost disturbing. The same excuses, the same gaslighting, the same accusations, the same lies. Looking through that folder felt like getting hit by a truck, because suddenly the timeline became much clearer. This wasn't a recent affair. It wasn't a short affair. It wasn't a mistake. According to the evidence Claire had gathered, Emma and Ryan had likely been involved for at least 11 months, possibly longer, almost an entire year. I honestly thought I was going to throw up. But then Claire showed me one final screenshot, and that was the moment the situation transformed from heartbreaking to absolutely insane. Because buried in one of the messages was a conversation about me, a conversation neither Emma nor Ryan ever expected me to see. And what they were saying about me was worse than the cheating itself. I don't think anything could have prepared me for that screenshot. Not the photos, not the lies, not the missing money, not there. Because up until that point, despite everything, part of me still believed there had once been some love left in my marriage. Maybe that sounds pathetic. Maybe it is. But after nearly a decade together, it's hard to completely shut off those feelings overnight. Then I read the messages, and whatever hope I had left died instantly. Claire slid her phone across the table. The screenshot showed a conversation between Emma and Ryan from several months earlier. I won't quote everything. Honestly, I don't want to. Even now it makes me angry. But the general message was clear. Emma wasn't trapped in a miserable marriage. She wasn't confused. She wasn't trying to figure out what she wanted. She wasn't struggling with guilt. She was mocking me with the man she was sleeping with. Jokes about how easy I was to fool. Jokes about how trusting I was. Jokes about how I never noticed anything. The worst part wasn't even the insults. It was how casual they were. Like hurting me was entertainment. Like I was some idiot standing in the background of their love story. I remember staring at the screen for a long time. Not speaking. Not moving. Just reading. Over and over. Hoping I'd somehow misunderstood. I hadn't. Across the table, Claire looked heartbroken. I know how that feels. That was the moment I realized she wasn't just showing me evidence. She was living through the exact same nightmare. Maybe worse, because she'd been carrying it alone for months. I handed the phone back. My hands were shaking. Jake looked furious. I've never seen him look that angry before. Not once. And then Claire showed us something else. Something that changed the entire situation. A message from Ryan discussing money. A lot of money. Specifically, money Emma had been giving him. At first I thought I misunderstood. Then I read it again. And again. And again. Oh, I understood perfectly. The missing money from our savings account? At least part of it had gone to Ryan. I felt sick. Apparently Ryan had gotten himself into debt. Significant debt. And according to their messages, Emma had been secretly helping him. Using our money. Money I had helped earn. Money we'd saved together. Money intended for our future. Just handing it over. Without asking. Without telling me. Without caring. I honestly didn't know whether I was angrier about the affair or the theft. Because that's what it felt like. Theft. $20,000 doesn't just disappear by accident. Jake looked ready to explode. Are you kidding me? Claire nodded grimly. There's more. Of course there was. There always seemed to be more. Apparently Ryan had been promising Emma they would eventually be together. The classic affair fantasy. Leave your spouse, I'll leave mine. We'll start over. We'll be happy. The kind of nonsense people tell each other when they're living in a fantasy world. The problem? According to several messages, Ryan wasn't actually planning to leave Claire, at least not anytime soon. In fact, based on what Claire had uncovered, he'd been telling both women completely different stories. Emma thought Ryan was preparing for divorce. Claire thought Ryan was committed to fixing their marriage. Meanwhile, Ryan was apparently just enjoying both situations. A professional liar, which was ironic, because he seemed to have found his perfect match. The more evidence we reviewed, the uglier everything became. By the end of the meeting, I felt emotionally drained. But before we left, Claire asked me a question. One simple question. What are you going to do now? I didn't have an answer. Not yet, but as fate would have it, I wouldn't get much time to think. Because when I got home that night, Emma was waiting for me. And judging by the expression on her face, she knew something had changed. What I didn't know yet was that she'd spent the entire day trying to cover her tracks. And she was about to tell a lie so ridiculous that even her own brother would end up laughing when he heard it. When I pulled into the driveway that night, I immediately knew something was off. Every light in the house was on. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway, even the guest room upstairs. It looked like someone had flipped every switch in the building. Emma was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. Wait, and that alone was unusual. Normally she'd be scrolling through her phone, watching TV, or claiming she had work to do. Instead, she was just sitting there, perfectly still, like she'd been rehearsing something. The second I entered, she forced a smile. I nodded. An awkward silence followed. Then she spoke. How was your day? The question sounded fake, painfully fake. I dropped my keys onto the counter. Fine. Another silence. Emma started talking almost immediately after that. Way too quickly, like she'd been holding the words back. So, funny story, my stomach sank. Whenever a sentence starts with funny story, it's almost never funny, and it's rarely a story. Usually it's damage control. Emma laughed nervously. You know those transfers from the savings account? There it was. I hadn't even mentioned them. Not once. Not in a text. Not on a phone call. Not in person. Yet somehow she'd brought them up immediately. Interesting. Very interesting. I kept my face neutral. What about them? She smiled. A strange smile. The reason I didn't tell you is because I wanted it to be a surprise. A surprise? I actually had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. $20,000 had vanished, and her explanation was a surprise. Okay, let's hear this masterpiece. What kind of surprise? Anna straightened up, then delivered one of the most ridiculous lies I'd ever heard. I was secretly investing it. I stared at her. She stared back, apparently expecting me to believe that. Investing it where? Another pause, another fake smile. Then she named a company that didn't exist. I knew it didn't exist because I'd literally never heard of it before. The way she said the name made it sound like she'd invented it 30 seconds earlier. I asked a few questions. Simple questions. Basic questions. Questions anyone making legitimate investments should be able to answer. She couldn't answer a single one. Not one. Every response became vaguer than the last. Then she started getting irritated. Because of course she did. That was her favorite defense mechanism. When the lies stopped working, she'd become angry. Why are you interrogating me? There it was. The classic line. I almost laughed. Instead, I asked one final question. If this was for us, why was it a secret? For the first time all evening, Emma didn't have an answer. Just silence. A long silence. Then she shrugged. I wanted it to be romantic. Romantic? $20,000 disappearing from a joint savings account was apparently romantic now. Good to know. The conversation somehow became even more absurd from there. She changed stories 3 separate times in less than 10 minutes. First it was an investment, then it was a business opportunity, then it was a temporary transfer. Then she claimed she couldn't discuss details because of confidentiality agreements. Confidentiality agreements for mystery investments in mystery companies that somehow involved our savings account. At that point I stopped asking questions. Not because I believed her, because I was learning something important. Emma had no idea how much I knew, and I wanted to keep it that way for now. So I nodded, pretended to accept her explanation, pretended everything was fine, and for a brief moment, she actually looked relieved. Then her phone buzzed. Just once. A single notification, but the reaction was instant. She grabbed the phone so fast she nearly knocked over her chair. And for one tiny second, before she turned the screen away, I saw a name. Ryan. Just Ryan. No fake contact name. No disguise. Nothing. The panic on her face told me everything. She knew I'd seen it. I knew she'd seen me see it. Neither of us said a word, but the atmosphere in that kitchen changed immediately. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Emma realized she might not be in control anymore. And the very next morning, everything would explode. Not because of me, not because of Jake, not because of Claire, because Ryan was about to make a huge mistake. A mistake that would expose both of them at the exact same time. The next morning started like any other. At least, that's what I thought. Emma left for work early. She barely spoke to me, just grabbed her coffee, her purse, and her phone and rushed out the door. The second she left, I called Jake. I told him about the conversation, the fake investment story, the mystery company, the panic when Ryan's name appeared on her screen. Jake's reaction was immediate. She is scared. I know. No, seriously, she is terrified. Maybe he was right, because people who think they're getting away with something don't usually start inventing ridiculous financial explanations out of nowhere. Something had changed. The pressure was building. Neither of us realized how quickly things were about to fall apart. Around noon, I got a text from Claire. 3 words. Call me. Now, my stomach dropped. I called immediately. The moment she answered, I could hear chaos in the background. People talking, phones ringing, someone yelling. What happened? Claire sounded stunned. Ryan messed up. I stood up so quickly my chair nearly tipped over. What did he do? Then she told me, and honestly, I almost couldn't believe it. Apparently Ryan had accidentally sent a message to the wrong person. Not just any message. A message intended for Emma. Instead, he'd sent it into a company group chat. A group chat containing coworkers, managers, supervisors, multiple employees, basically the worst possible audience. I thought Claire was joking. She wasn't. The message itself wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. According to Claire, it read, "Last night was worth every risk. Can't stop thinking about you," followed by a heart emoji. And Emma's name. Ella, by name. Not exactly subtle. Apparently, Ryan deleted the message almost immediately. Unfortunately for him, dozens of people had already seen it, including his supervisor, and as fate would have it, one of Emma's coworkers. The fallout was immediate. People started asking questions. Screenshots spread. Rumors exploded. And suddenly the affair wasn't some secret hidden relationship anymore. It was office gossip. The kind that spreads through a workplace at light speed. I sat there stunned. Months of sneaking around. Months of lying. Months of secrecy. And all it took was one careless text. Claire wasn't finished. That's not even the worst part. Of course it wasn't. At this stage, every disaster seemed to come with bonus disasters. Apparently Ryan panicked. Instead of staying quiet, he started calling people, trying to explain, trying to control the situation, trying to convince coworkers they'd misunderstood. The problem? Every explanation contradicted the previous one. Sound familiar? By the end of the morning, he'd apparently told 4 different stories. One coworker compared notes with another, then another, then another. The lies became obvious. And once people start realizing someone is lying, they start looking closer. Very close. I was still processing all of this when another call came in. Chuck. The second I answered, he sounded furious. Have you talked to Emma? No. What happened? There was a pause. Then Jake said something that made my jaw drop. She called Mom. So, she's blaming you. Of course she was. Why wouldn't she? According to Jake, Emma had called her mother in full panic mode. Not because she'd been caught cheating. Not because she'd taken money. Not because she'd lied for months. No. According to Emma's latest version of reality, this entire situation was somehow my fault. I was supposedly controlling. I was supposedly emotionally distant. I was supposedly driving her away. I actually laughed when Jake told me. Not because it was funny, because it was absurd. The affair had been going on for nearly a year. The missing money was real. The messages were real. The photos were real. Yet somehow she was still trying to rewrite reality. Jake sounded disgusted. Then he told me something I'll always respect him for. His mother hadn't defended Emma. Not this time. Apparently she'd finally seen enough. Instead, she told Emma something simple. 3 words. Stop lying, Emma. The line went quiet for a second. Then Jake added, Mom hung up on her. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I felt something strange. Not happiness. Not satisfaction. Relief. Because finally someone besides me was refusing to play along. But the biggest shock of the day was still ahead. Because that evening, I got home and discovered Emma had beaten me there. And she wasn't alone. Waiting in my living room was an unexpected guest. One who was about to completely change the direction of this story. Emma's father. When I opened the front door and stepped into the living room, I immediately froze. Emma was sitting on one end of the couch, Her father was sitting on the other. Neither looked happy. Actually, that's an understatement. Emma looked nervous. Her father looked furious. For a brief second, nobody said anything. Then her dad stood up. You're ho! The tone of his voice caught me off guard. I'd known the man for almost a decade. I'd never heard him sound like that. Not once. He wasn't angry at me. He was angry in general. The kind of anger that's been building for a long time. Emma immediately jumped in. Can we all just talk calmly? That sentence alone told me things weren't going her way. Because Emma only asked for calm when she was losing control of a conversation. Her father ignored her completely. Instead, he looked directly at me. Then he said, I owe you an apology. I genuinely didn't know how to respond. But he shook his head. A big one. Emma looked horrified. Dead enough. Just one word, but it shut her down instantly. I've never seen that happen before. Her father turned back toward me. Jake told me everything. The room went silent. Emma looked like she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Apparently, she hadn't expected Jake to tell their father. Or maybe she hadn't expected her father to believe him. Either way, she looked panicked. Her dad continued. I should have listened sooner. I didn't understand. Listened to what? Then he explained. Over the past several months, multiple family members had noticed Emma acting strangely. Not just Jake, her mother, and that, a cousin, even her younger sister. People had been asking questions. People had noticed contradictions. People had noticed the lies. But whenever someone confronted Emma, she'd become angry and somehow convince everyone to back off. Classic Emma. Deflect. Deny. At that. Repeat. The problem was that eventually the lies became too obvious. And after the workplace incident with Ryan, everything started unraveling. Her father sat down again. Then he looked at his daughter. Tell him the truth. Emma immediately crossed her arms. There are two sides to every story. Her dad laughed. Actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because he'd apparently run out of patience. Then tell your side. Emma opened her mouth. Pause. Closed it. Then tried a different approach. It's complicated. There it was. The universal slogan of people caught doing something terrible. It's complicated. I was starting to hate those words. Her father wasn't impressed either. What's complicated? Another silence. Then Emma did something remarkable. She started crying. Now, under normal circumstances, that would sound harsh to point out. But after months of lies, the timing felt suspicious. Especially because the tears appeared the exact moment she realized nobody was buying her excuses. Her father clearly noticed, too. Because his expression didn't change. Not even slightly. For the next 30 minutes, Emma cycled through every explanation imaginable. She felt neglected. She felt misunderstood. She was unhappy. She was confused. She didn't mean for things to go this far. She never wanted anyone to get hurt. Every excuse in the book. The one thing she never did? Take responsibility. Not once. Everything was someone else's fault. Work stress. Ryan. Life circumstances. Bad timing. The weather. Probably gravity if we'd stayed there long enough. Eventually her father asked a question. A simple question. One she couldn't dodge. Did you take the money? The room went completely silent. Emma looked away. That was answer enough. But then she actually said it. Ness. I felt my stomach drop. Even though I already knew. Hearing it out loud was different. Real. Final. Her father closed his eyes. Slowly. Like someone fighting off a migraine. Then he asked, where did it go? Another pause. Then Emma answered. And somehow, against all odds, things got even worse. Because according to Emma, the $20,000 wasn't all the money that had disappeared. Not even close. I honestly thought I misheard her. $20,000 was already a disaster. It was years of savings. Years of planning. Years of sacrifices. Then Emma quietly said, that's not all of it. For a moment, nobody reacted. I think all three of us were trying to process what she just admitted. Her father was the first to speak. What does that mean? Emma stared at the floor. No answer. Hello? Nothing. How much? The room felt suffocating. Finally, she whispered a number, and I felt like all the air left my lungs. $43,000. $43,000. I genuinely thought she was joking. Not because it was funny. Because the number was so absurd my brain rejected it. I looked at her, then at her father, then back at her. You're kidding. She wasn't. Her father looked physically ill. Tell me that's not true. Emma started crying again. Real tears this time. Not because she'd suddenly developed a conscience. Because she knew there was no escaping the truth anymore. The story finally came out. Or at least most of it. Over the previous year, she'd secretly drained money from multiple places. Savings. An investment account. A small emergency fund we'd built years earlier. Money I'd barely checked because I trusted her completely. Apparently, that had been a mistake. A huge mistake. Some of the money went to Ryan. Some of it went toward trips, hotel rooms, gifts, restaurants, weekend getaways she disguised as work events. The more she talked, the angrier I became, because every explanation revealed another lie, another betrayal, another piece of reality she'd hidden from me. Then came the biggest shock. According to Emma, things with Ryan weren't going well anymore. I almost laughed. Of course they weren't. Affairs built on lies tend to collapse under the weight of even more lies. Apparently Ryan had started pulling away, making excuses, canceling plans, avoiding conversations about divorce, avoiding conversations about the future, avoiding commitment in general. Funny how that works. The fantasy had started breaking apart, and for the first time, Emma had begun realizing she'd risked everything for someone who wasn't planning to choose her. Her father listened quietly. Then he asked, "So when were you going to tell him?" Emma didn't answer. That silence said everything. Because she wasn't going to tell me. Not voluntarily. Not ever. If Ryan hadn't messed up that workplace message, I'd probably still be in the dark. Months later, maybe years later, still believing whatever story she happened to be selling that week. The realization made me furious. But then something unexpected happened. A knock at the front door. 3 sharp knocks. Everyone froze. I looked toward the entryway. Emma looked confused. Her father looked confused. Nobody seemed to know who it could be. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "Don't freak out." Not exactly reassuring. A second message arrived immediately afterward. "Claire is there." I stared at the screen, then toward the front door, then back at the screen. Before I could respond, another text appeared, and she's not alone. My stomach dropped, because there was only one person who could possibly be with her. And if I was right, the next few minutes were about to become the most chaotic of my entire life. I opened the front door, and immediately wished I had some popcorn, because standing on my porch were Claire and Ryan, together. Sorbo. Claire looked calm. Ryan looked like a man being marched toward his own execution. The second Emma saw them, she jumped to her feet. "What is he doing here?" Ryan visibly flinched. That caught my attention immediately. This wasn't the confident guy from the photos. This wasn't the guy from the messages. This wasn't the guy she'd been risking her marriage for. This guy looked terrified. Claire folded her arms. "We need to talk." Emma looked ready to explode. "No." Claire ignored her and walked inside. Ryan followed, very reluctantly. The atmosphere in the living room instantly became radioactive. Nobody knew where to sit. Nobody knew what to say. And nobody looked happy to be there, especially Ryan. Her father stared at him for several seconds, then said, "So you're Ryan." Ryan nodded. Her father nodded back. "You're an idiot." Honestly, that was one of the more polite things said that night. Ryan didn't even argue, which told me he probably agreed. For several awkward moments, everyone just stood there. Then Claire decided she had enough. She pulled out her phone, opened a folder, and placed it on the coffee table. "I brought everything." Emma's face immediately lost color. "Everything. Not some things. Everything." That word landed like a bomb. Claire wasn't bluffing. Apparently, after the workplace incident, she'd gone all in. Screenshots, photos, messages, financial records, timelines, backups, cloud archives. If evidence were an Olympic sport, Claire had won gold. Ryan looked miserable. Emma looked panicked. Her father looked ready to age 10 years in a single evening. Claire started talking, and once she started, she didn't stop. For nearly an hour, she walked through the entire timeline. Every lie, every trip, every excuse, every contradiction, every promise. The room became quieter and quieter as more details emerged. Then came the moment that completely shattered Emma's remaining confidence. Claire read one of Ryan's messages aloud. A message sent only 3 weeks earlier. A message promising Emma they would be together soon. Emma actually looked relieved for a second, like she thought the message somehow helped her. Then Claire read the next message, sent by Ryan, to a friend, on the exact same day. In that message, Ryan described Emma as temporary. Temporary. The word hit the room like a grenade. Emma looked stunned, actually stunned. She turned toward Ryan. Ryan closed his eyes. Bad sign, very bad sign. What does that mean? Emma asked again. No answer. What does temporary mean? Ryan rubbed his face, then made the single worst decision of the evening. He answered honestly, I didn't think this would last forever. Silence. Absolute silence. Even I felt that one. Emma stared at him, then laughed. A short, shocked laugh. You told me you loved me. Ryan didn't answer. You told me you were leaving Claire. Still nothing. You told me we'd have a future. Nothing. At this point, everyone in the room looked uncomfortable, even Claire. Not because she felt bad for Emma, because watching someone's fantasy collapse in real time is awkward no matter who they are. Then Ryan finally spoke, and somehow made things worse. I thought that's what you wanted to hear. You could have heard a pin drop. Emma looked like she'd been slapped. For the first time since this whole disaster began, she wasn't the one controlling the lies. She was the one getting lied to. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, especially her father, who quietly muttered, "Unbelievable." But the biggest shock of the evening came moments later, because Claire wasn't finished. Not even close. She had one final piece of evidence, one final revelation, and when she shared it, both Emma and Ryan realized they'd been deceiving each other the entire time. Neither of them saw it coming, and honestly, neither did I. At that point, the room felt like it had survived a hurricane. Everyone looked exhausted. Emma's fantasy was collapsing. Ryan looked like he wanted to disappear. Claire had spent the last hour dismantling months of lies, and I was sitting there wondering how this had somehow become my actual life. Then Claire said, "There's one more thing." The moment those words left her mouth, both Emma and Ryan visibly tensed. That was interesting, because it suggested they each thought they knew what was coming. The problem? Neither of them did. Claire opened another folder. This one was thinner, smaller, but judging by her expression, it was important. Very important. She looked directly at Emma. "Did Ryan ever tell you he separated from me last winter?" Emma nodded immediately. "That's..." Ryan closed his eyes. Another bad sign. Claire then looked at Ryan. "Did you tell her that?" Ryan hesitated. "Too long. Way too long." Then he quietly said, "Yes." Claire nodded. "Interesting." The room went silent. Then she pulled out a document. Not a screenshot. Not a message. An actual document. She placed it on the coffee table. It was a lease agreement. Signed by Ryan. Signed by Claire. Dated 6 months after the supposed separation. The document showed they had renewed their lease together. Together. As a couple. For another year. Emma stared at the page. Then at Ryan. Then back at the page. The color drained from her face. "You said you moved out." Ryan didn't answer. "You said you were living with your brother." Still nothing. Claire folded her arms. "He never moved out." The silence afterward was almost painful. Emma looked genuinely confused, which was ironic considering how many people she'd spent the past year confusing. Then Claire turned to Ryan again. "Now tell her what you told me." Ryan looked trapped. Completely trapped. He stared at the floor for several seconds, then finally spoke. "I told Claire I ended things with Emma months ago." This time it was Emma's turn to freeze. "What?" Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ryan swallowed, then repeated it. "I told Claire it was over." Emma blinked. "You told your wife the affair was over?" Ryan nodded weakly. "Months ago." The room exploded. Not physically, verbally. Emma shot to her feet. "What are you talking about?" Ryan tried to explain. "Badly. Very badly." The more he talked, the worse it sounded. Apparently, he'd spent months maintaining completely different versions of reality. One for Claire, one for Emma, and probably one for himself. Claire believed the affair had ended. Emma believed Ryan was preparing for a future together. Meanwhile, Ryan was bouncing between both stories depending on who he was talking to. Her father actually started laughing. Not because it was funny, because the situation had become so absurd it was impossible not to. "You're both unbelievable." Nobody disagreed, not even Ryan. Then Claire delivered the final blow, the thing she'd saved for last. She looked directly at Emma. "Did he tell you about Ashley?" The room instantly went quiet. Emma frowned. "Who's Ashley?" Ryan looked horrified. Actual horror, the kind you can't fake. Claire smiled, a cold smile. "Oh." She looked at Ryan. "You didn't tell her." Ryan didn't say a word. Claire turned back toward Emma. "Ashley is the woman Ryan started seeing 3 months ago." For a moment, nobody processed it. Then the meaning landed. Ryan hadn't just been lying to Claire. He hadn't just been lying to Emma. He'd been seeing someone else too. A third woman. A completely separate relationship. Emma stared at him, speechless. Absolutely speechless. The irony was almost poetic. The woman who spent a year helping someone cheat had just discovered she'd been cheated on too. And judging by the look on her face, she genuinely never saw it coming. But as dramatic as that revelation was, it wasn't actually the thing that ended my marriage. What ended my marriage happened later that night. After everyone left. After the shouting stopped. After the lies finally ran out. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, Emma and I were completely alone. And she finally told me the truth. The real truth. Or at least as much of it as she was capable of admitting. By the time everyone finally left, it was nearly midnight. The house felt eerily quiet. For hours there had been shouting, accusations, tears, confessions, and enough drama to fuel 3 reality TV seasons. Now there was just silence. Emma sat at the kitchen table. The same table where she tried to convince me that $43,000 disappearing was some kind of romantic surprise. I stood by the counter for a long time. Neither of us spoke. Honestly, I think we were both exhausted. Emotionally, mentally, physically, everything. Eventually Emma broke the silence. I never thought it would end like this. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because what exactly had she expected? A happy ending? A parade? An award for creative lying? Instead I just said, "How did you think it would end?" She didn't answer immediately. For the first time in months, she actually seemed unsure of herself. Then she quietly admitted something. I didn't have a plan. That, more than anything else, explained the entire disaster. No plan, just impulse after impulse, lie after lie, decision after decision, always focused on what she wanted in the moment. Never thinking about consequences, never thinking about the people she'd hurt, never thinking about what happened when the fantasy eventually collided with reality. Emma stared down at the table. Then she started talking, really talking, not making excuses, not blaming me, not blaming Ryan, just talking. And what she said surprised me, not because it justified anything, because it was painfully ordinary. There wasn't some dramatic reason, no hidden drama, no secret conspiracy, no grand love story. She'd enjoyed the attention, that was it, at least according to her. The compliments, the excitement, the secrecy, the feeling of being wanted. It started as flirting, then emotional cheating, then physical cheating, and once she'd crossed the line, it became easier to cross it again, and again, and again. Each lie made the next lie easier. Each betrayal made the next betrayal easier, until eventually she was living 2 separate lives. I listened quietly, partly because I wanted answers, partly because I was finally realizing something important. None of this had happened because of me. For months she'd convinced me I was paranoid, controlling, insecure, not good enough. But listening to her now, the reality was obvious. Her choices belonged to her, not me, not Ryan. Oh, then she asked a question. The question I'd known was coming. Is there any chance we can fix this? I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd spent nearly a decade loving. The woman I'd planned a future with. The woman I barely recognized anymore. And surprisingly, I didn't feel anger. Not anymore. The anger had burned itself out. What remained was sadness. A deep sadness. The kind that comes when you finally accept something is over. I answered honestly. Nope. Emma started crying again. But this time it felt different. Not manipulative. Not strategic, just defeated. The reality had finally arrived. No more stories, no more excuses, no more alternate versions of events, just consequences. We sat there quietly for several minutes. Then I told her I wanted a divorce. The words felt strange leaving my mouth. How file, but also correct. For the first time in months, something felt clear. Emma nodded, slowly, like she'd expected the answer. Maybe she had. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. I'm sorry. 3 simple words. Words I'd wanted to hear for months, maybe even years. The problem was that by then, they didn't change anything. Some things break beyond repair. Trust was one of them. Eventually Emma went upstairs to pack a few things. I stayed in the kitchen, alone, listening to drawers open and close, listening to the sounds of a marriage ending. And despite everything that had happened, I realized something strange. I wasn't devastated anymore. I was relieved. Because the uncertainty was finally over. The lies were over. The gaslighting was over. The constant self-doubt was over. For the first time in a very long time, I knew exactly where I stood. What I didn't know yet was that the most important conversation of this entire story would happen the following morning. And it wouldn't be with Emma. It would be with Jake, the person who had stood by me when his own sister betrayed me. And what he said changed how I viewed the entire experience. The morning after Emma moved out, I sat alone on my back porch with a cup of coffee. The house felt different. Empty, not in a bad way, just different. For nearly a year I'd been living in a constant state of confusion without even realizing it. Questioning myself, second-guessing my instincts, trying to solve the puzzle while someone kept changing the pieces. Now there was nothing left to solve. The truth was out. As ugly as it was finally out. Around 9 in the morning, Jake showed up. He didn't call first. He just showed up carrying coffee and a paper bag full of breakfast sandwiches. Honestly, it was probably exactly what I needed. We sat outside for a while without talking. Eventually he looked at me and said, "You okay?" I thought about it. Then I gave the only honest answer. No. Jake nodded. A few minutes passed. Then he added, "But you will be." That hit harder than I expected. Because despite everything, I hadn't really thought much about the future. I'd been too busy surviving the present. Jake stared out toward the yard. Then he said something I'll never forget. You know what bothers me most? Well, the way she made you doubt yourself. I looked at him. He continued. You noticed things were wrong. He started counting on his fingers. The phone, the lies, the disappearing money, the stories that didn't add up, the weird behavior, the late nights. You saw all of it. I nodded, slowly, because he was right. I had seen it. The problem was that every time I questioned it, Emma convinced me I was the problem instead. Jake shook his head. Don't ever ignore your instincts like that again. That conversation stayed with me. Still does. Because when I look back at everything now, the cheating wasn't the only betrayal. The lying hurt. The affair hurt. The money hurt. But what really damaged me was being manipulated into distrusting my own judgment, into believing obvious red flags weren't real, into apologizing for asking reasonable questions. That kind of thing stays with you. Healing from it takes time, a lot of time. The divorce process wasn't fun, neither was untangling the financial mess. Lawyers got involved, accountants got involved. There were meetings, paperwork, and plenty of uncomfortable conversations. But eventually things moved forward. That's what life does. It moves forward whether you're ready or not. As for Emma, the fantasy she'd risked everything for collapsed almost immediately. Ryan disappeared from her life shortly after everything came out. Apparently, Ashley wasn't thrilled to discover she was part of a love quadrangle either. Shocking, I know. Last I heard, nobody involved ended up together, which honestly wasn't surprising. Relationships built on deception usually don't produce fairy tale endings. Claire filed for divorce. Ryan got exactly the reputation he'd earned, and Emma had to deal with the consequences of choices she'd spent months trying to avoid. As for Jake, he's still in my life. People ask me sometimes how that's possible. Simple. Family isn't just about blood, it's about character. And when things got ugly, Jake showed more character than almost anyone I've ever met. He could have stayed silent. He could have protected his sister. He could have pretended not to notice. Instead, he did the difficult thing, the right thing. I'll always respect him for that. So I guess I'll end this post with a few things I've learned. First, when someone's stories constantly change, pay attention. Second, trust is built slowly but destroyed very quickly. Third, if every concern you raise somehow becomes your fault, that's a problem. And finally, don't confuse love with blindness. You can love someone deeply and still hold them accountable for their actions. You can care about someone and still walk away. And sometimes walking away is the healthiest thing you'll ever do. If anyone reading this is going through something similar, my advice is simple. Pay attention to actions, not words. Words are easy. Words are cheap. Actions tell the truth, even when people don't. End of story. Like and subscribe.